the topic of whether or not God works in our lives personally, and if God maybe has a plan or direction for you to move in. We started with the analogy a couple weeks ago of God being a weaver and us being the individuals who sit at the shuttle and move at his command or move at his nod. We had looked at a couple examples of where God directs us to begin with. We had made the point a couple weeks ago that it always leads to the same place. It always leads to salvation, always leads to sanctification. That is the call that goes out universally to everybody. There's never going to be a point in time where God is going to lead you to lust after something else, to covet somebody else's property, to be with your neighbor's wife. That's just not going to be the case. That's never going to be a part of God's movement for you. So we looked last week at a couple ideas of what we are to do to kind of see God's plan or God's purpose in our lives. We had begun with the topic of asking. If we are going to ask that God provide or protect or guide or establish us, that's going to be an essential part of it. If you want him to have a purpose or a plan for you in your life, then you need to ask. Ask for it to be there and ask to see it. We had then looked at a couple other ideas last week. We looked at the idea of putting God's will first. That what he wants out of your life has to be more important than what you want out of your life. And that is a really difficult thing. That's a really difficult place to start with. Because all of us, from the time that we are very small, we grew up with ideas and dreams and plans of what we expect our lives to be, or what we hope that they become, realizing that we only have one life to live. And the older that we get, we realize that goes by a lot faster than we expected it to go by. And so as you look at all of that, we have these dreams, we have these ambitions, these desires of what we want our lives to be, and consist of all the things we want to do or achieve, and that has to take a second place or a backseat to what God would want us to. You consider what Abraham maybe wanted his life to look like and his life to consist of before God called him, as opposed to what happened after God called him. Or David, his life trajectory was shepherd, youngest of all the kids, destined to be shepherd all of his life until God called him to a very difficult life of war, a life where he had to be away from his family, a life that he fled for his life a lot. And the list kind of goes on and on, that our wills have to take a second place to God's will in order for us to really move at his nod. And then we had looked at last week the idea of being open to change. We looked there in Joshua chapter 1, as Joshua commands the people around him to be strong and courageous. And they respond in verse 16 that we will go wherever you send us. We will do all that you command us. Only let the Lord your God be with you. And that if we're really going to do as God wants us to, that there's an element of change that's going to happen in our lives, that it's not going to be a static, you're going to be here for the rest of your life, always only talking to the same people, only always doing the same things. There are going to be opportunities that arise that you have to seize whenever those opportunities rise. If we pray that God open doors, that we be able to talk to our neighbors or talk to our family members about the gospel, that when those opportunities arise, we need to be willing to seize those. But there are times also when the door is closed, when the opportunity dries up, where the people that we're talking to turn into swine. Terrible way to phrase that, but I think you know what I mean, looking at what Jesus says about casting your pearls before swine. I tried to swing that, it didn't swing very well. So, moving on. Sometimes we get in our habits of this is how I do God's work. And sometimes those habits are not effective. And we need to be willing to change those habits in order to do the work more effectively in some other ways. So those were the areas that we had looked at last week. I want to continue on that same way and look at a few more things. We had ran out of time last week, so I want to continue on with the same topic. So how is it that I look for God's purpose or God's plan in my life? I'm going to ask, I'm going to put his will first, I'm going to be willing to change. And then the next thing I would suggest is here in Joshua chapter 24, probably the most famous or the most popular of all verses in verse 15. Joshua stands up before the crowd and he gives them in chapter 23 and 24, the last two speeches that he gives before he dies. He challenges them to be faithful to God. He says in verse 14, "Now therefore fear the Lord, serve him in sincerity and in faithfulness. Put away the gods that your fathers served beyond the river in Egypt, and serve the Lord. If it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you now dwell. But as for me and for my house, we will serve the Lord." I would suggest that conviction without compromise has to be a staple in our lives. If we have this desire that I want to do all that I can to bring others to Christ, that is a great desire. But there's a tendency in our minds to subjugate some of those truths in order to bring in more people. If we want to outgrow this space in the next 2 years, there's probably some really easy ways to do that go outside of God's bounds. If we want to just fill the building, then that is a real possibility. But if you want to make people disciples of Christ, you can't do that by compromising the truth. We are to be people who are to never change the gospel to suit the hearers of the gospel. We've been looking at that as we went through Titus and we went through Timothy, where Paul tells Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 4 that there be people who have itching ears, who accumulate for themselves teachers to suit their own passions and their own pleasures. But that can't be us. We have to be people who are both willing to serve other people, but never change or never compromise. We are never to change the work of the church in order to get more people in the chairs. The work of the church is to spread the gospel. And if we change that to a social gospel or social causes, if we put the liberty of our democracy as the main focus of our church, then we may fill more chairs, but we aren't bringing people to Christ. We are to serve and to please God, and we cannot move at his command if we compromise our convictions. Joshua makes the point here that if, in verse 15, if everybody else in all of Israel decides to turn their back on God and to serve other gods, then he's going to choose to serve God. He has a conviction without compromise. He urges them, he pleads with them for them to make that same exact choice, but regardless of what they do, whatever they choose, it doesn't affect him in what he chooses. And that can be really difficult if it comes to our families, comes to our close friends. Whenever they choose to do things that are outside of God's bounds, that's really easy or it's really convicting in our minds for us to change our convictions in order to keep being friends with them or keep being around them at social family gatherings. And making those stances are really difficult. But if we are really going to move at God's direction, then he's always going to direct us to have convictions without compromises. Turn with me to Mark chapter 9. Mark chapter 9. In Mark chapter 9, verses 33 down through verse 37, there's a discussion that arises amongst the disciples. And it leads us to another important point to be made about God's direction for us in our lives. He says in verse 33 that they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you discussing on the way?" But they kept silent, for on the way they were arguing with one another about who would be the greatest. And he sat down and he called the 12, and he said to them, "If anyone would be first, he must be last of all and servant of all." And he took a child and he put it in their midst of them, and taking him in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever receives one such child in my name receives me, and whoever receives me receives not me, but him who sent me." There is an element of service that is implicit in our convictions to be Christians. Jesus makes the point that he did not come to be served, but to serve. He tells us over in Matthew chapter 8 that it's enough for us to be like him, that we're not greater than him in our needs to be served, but our need to serve. And so there's this discussion that arises. I think it comes up about 5 times through all of the Gospels, at least 4 separate occasions that this exact same conversation happens amongst the disciples. It's rather remarkable how often this same conversation happens amongst them. Whether they're on the way, or whether you have 2 of them who send their mother to go and to make this plead with Jesus for them to be the greatest in the kingdom, or they're sitting at table and having this discussion at the Last Supper. It comes up over and over again. And Jesus' response is always the same, that the greatest among you must be the last and the servant of all. That if we're really going to move at God's command, it's going to lead us not to be served by other people, but it's going to lead us to serve everybody. In 1 Peter chapter 4, over in verse 10, Peter writes there in verse 10, he says, as each one has received a gift, use it. But he doesn't just stop there. He says, as each one has received a gift, use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's varied grace, or God's manifold grace. The whole purpose of us having a skill or having a gift or having an ability, of being given blessings, is not to self-satisfy, not to self-serve, not to be fulfilled in the things that we have or the things that we have become, but to find our fulfillment in serving others with that. But sometimes that means that the purpose of our skills might be to do the meanest and the lowest of all jobs. There's a heart-wrenching story that I heard not too long ago. A lady in Pakistan was given in an arranged marriage. And in the words of her daughter, the lady was an exceptional beauty, of which her husband did not share any of it. And everywhere they went, everyone made note, that woman is a beautiful woman, very attractive. She is gorgeous. And the husband spent years feeling insecure, feeling that his wife, who was an arranged wife, was going to leave him for somebody else, that other people would appreciate for her beauty, and she would find someone else. And even after having kids, and after the kids have grown a little bit, she kept on getting more attention. You had that, after a couple kids, and you move on to after mid-30s, you kind of start losing that, and she didn't. And he became more and more paranoid and more jealous of all the attention and more paranoid of all that might happen. And eventually one day it got the better of him. In that moment, they were having an argument in the bedroom, and in the heat of the moment, out of spite and in irrationality, he threw acid on her face to disfigure her. And then he came to his senses and realized what he'd done and fled the house in shame and never came back. So she went from an exceptional beauty to someone who hid for the next couple decades, hiding her face, making sure that nobody got to see what happened to her. And then years later, the husband found out that he was dying of cancer, and he had feared dying alone. And so after years of not contacting the family, of not being there, he reaches out and he contacts his wife and asks her to take care of him for his last few months while he died. So she goes to her children to convince her children that she needs to do this and kind of have their support on her side while she takes care of him. And the children were outraged. Here is this man who has abused you, has fled and has never been there in their lives, hasn't been there in her life. And now, years later, all he wants is to take more from them. And they ask, why would you do this? And she made the statement that she was a Christian. And as a Christian, she believed that she needed to be someone who forgave and served other people. And in Pakistan, that is not a common religion and is not a common mindset. And here we are, decades later, still talking about her example from halfway around the world. That's amazing. Sometimes God's use of us is not going to be glamorous. It's not going to be notorious or notorietous. We're going to make that a word today. It's not always going to be praised and lauded by other people. Sometimes we will never be known for the things that we have done. Sometimes nobody will ever know the things that we have done. We don't need to be looked at or to be recognized for the good that we've done in order to move at God's command. And what Jesus states there over in Mark chapter 9 has to be something that sticks in our minds, that we have to be individuals who are willing to serve. Anybody and everybody that we have the chance to. And Jesus leaves himself as an example of that. In John chapter 13, Jesus sits down at the Last Supper, and in verses 1 through 3, it makes the point that loving them to the end and knowing that he was about to die, and after has been put into Judas' heart for him to betray him, Jesus takes off his outer garment, wraps a towel around him, and begins to wash the disciples' feet. He says, what you've seen me do, you do likewise. Now, what we see in the New Testament throughout the book of Acts is not a series of feet-washing churches. And that doesn't become a modem of their worship service, because the analogy in John chapter 13 is not that they literally take time each week to wash each other's feet, but the idea is for them to humble themselves before other people and to serve one another. And we see that through the entire book of Acts. If we really want to move at God's nod, it's not going to be something that's always going to lead us to be the most prestigious, the most well-known person. It's not about creating a group following around ourselves or to be noted for that being generous or kind. It is to be the servant of all and the last of all. Look me over in Mark chapter 9. We're going to look at these verses one more time. We need to be people who are willing to not be number one. He makes the point here again in these verses that Jesus says in verse 35, if anyone would be first, he must be last and servant of all. We live in a time in a society where we have the desire and the will to be number one. As America's number one. We like being number one wherever we go. As children who were raised in sports, we're taught to never settle for second best. You come home with the trophy, or you don't come home at all. However your parents phrased it. We like sports teams that are winning. There's a reason that there's not a whole lot of Brewers fans. There's a reason that there's not a whole lot of Bears fans. We like to be a part of winning teams. We like to be number one. Whenever we go to our workplace, we don't look in order to be just a cog in the machine. We like to be recognized and to be put forward. There's a reason that we work so hard in what we do in order to be the best at what we do. But when it comes to being Christians, being number one isn't God's design or God's purpose. There can't be everyone being number ones. Some people are going to be designed to be number twos and number threes and number fours. That all of us together cannot be number one. It's just a mathematical impossibility. And in the pursuit of personal glorification and self-acclaim, we often fall into ruin and all kinds of problems, not looking toward what God wants us to have in our lives, but trying to find fulfillment in our own glory. There's a huge thing we need to understand about that. That we try to fulfill that hole in ourselves by being the best at something. And sometimes that happens inside the church. We try to fulfill ourselves and being the best of the Christians. And that seems to be happening here amongst the disciples. Okay, I've given up home, I've given up family, I've traveled with you, we've had sleepless nights, we've gone hungry, we've almost been capsized in boats a number of times. Now let's discuss who's the best at being this humble person. Who's the best at being this self-sacrificing person? And even in that arena, there's this competition to be number one. And Jesus makes the point that that can't be a part of our mindset. It can't be a goal or desire for us to be number one. If that is the goal, then we're always going to miss it. We're considered to be individuals who are members of one another, members of the same body, who are to build up together, to sow together, who run together, who fight side by side for the gospel together. That the glory of one is the glory of all, and the sorrow of one is the pain of all. If I'm not willing to be anything other than number one, then I'm going to miss my opportunity to serve other people. I'm going to miss the opportunities, the open doors that are around me. My goal is not to look to win, but my goal is to do the good for God's kingdom. And that doesn't matter who it is. If John is the person who reaches out and he finds a contact and he becomes a Christian, that's a wonderful thing. There is no need for me to feel, oh no, John did something, I haven't done that thing. There's a new Christian. That's wonderful. There is no need for it to be me. Now, should I be doing my part? Absolutely. But if someone else gets the glory for the work that they've done, does that take away from mine? No. Being all members of one another, being all family together, that if one is glorified, all are glorified together. There's a lack of competition that comes with that. When Paul writes to the Philippians in Philippians chapter 2, he makes the point for let there be no conceit or no competition to be amongst you. Because competition has self-glorification in mind rather than the good of all. One of the last things I would suggest to us, it comes over in Titus chapter 1, the same passage we had looked at earlier in our Bible class this morning. We're to be people who have conviction without compromise, that we are to be willing to serve and be satisfied in not being number one. And as we get over to Titus chapter 1, I would suggest the last thing for this morning or this afternoon is to be individuals who have discipline without drudgery. Now, there are two types of discipline. One is a self-discipline, and Titus is a great book to look at when it comes to self-discipline. He describes the elders in verse 7 and verse 8, that an overseer must be God's steward. He must be above reproach, must not be arrogant or quick-tempered or drunkard or violent or greedy for gain, but hospitable, lover of good, self-controlled, upright, holy, and disciplined. As you get over to chapter 2, we won't take the time to look at all of them, but when he talks about the older men, older women, younger men, and the bondservants in verse 9, all of them have one thing in common. They're all told to be people who are disciplined or self-disciplined people. Now, Paul uses the analogy in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 25 through verse 27, that every athlete exercises self-control in all things. Then he makes the point that they do this to receive a perishable wreath, but we do it for an imperishable. Now, we recognize this. Every couple years, we watch the Olympics, whether it be Winter Olympics or Summer Olympics, and we see people who have dedicated their lives of watching what they eat, not taking time off. They go to the gym, they go to the racetrack, they go to the shot put arena, whatever area it is, bobsled, downhill, ski place. They spend all of their lives in physically training themselves, mentally training themselves. Every area of their life has been brought under control in order to fulfill one day at the Olympics or one event at the Olympics. And Paul makes the point that they do all of that work, all of that self-discipline, all of that regulation of themselves. They do all of that in order to receive something that is perishable. But we exercise all of the self-control, all of that spiritual control, in order to achieve something that is imperishable. In verse 26, he says, "So I do not run aimlessly. I don't box as one who beats the air, but I discipline my body, and I keep it under control, lest after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified." We see the advantage of an athlete's discipline that makes them great and able to compete. And yet somehow we fail to see our need for self-discipline and in spiritual matters and see the value that it has in every way. Now, Paul makes the point as you get over Timothy, 1 Timothy chapter 4, he makes the point that bodily exercise is of value, that there is value to it. But self-discipline is a value in every way. Sometimes we start off on this path of discipline only to find it to be drudgery after a short time. I'm going to be someone who gets up in the morning, I'm going to read every morning with my breakfast. Or I'm going to sit down with a cup of coffee in the afternoon, I'm going to read a couple chapters. Or I'm going to be someone who just makes it a service every week. That's going to be my goal for this year. And we only make it a few weeks into the year before we realize, man, this is just a lot of work. Or every week I'm going to talk to somebody about the scriptures who is not a Christian. I'm going to invite one person every month to church who isn't a Christian. And we have great goals, great plans, but it becomes drudgerous to us to do that on a regular basis. But Paul says that he disciplines himself, that he brings himself into control, lest he be disqualified. Recognizing that what we have is not a sprint, but a marathon, or ultra marathon, depending on how long you get to live. And we need to be disciplined from the beginning to the end. That we can't start off for 2 months being really good, and then, oh man, this self-discipline, this is really boring. Not working out. We need to be individuals who are disciplined without drudgery. Last passage for this morning is Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews chapter 12. The other type of discipline that the scriptures talk about is God's discipline for us. When you think about God's plan in your life and moving at his nod, these aren't specific things of, today you will see this and this will tell you how to do this. These are general principles of how to live your life so that you are in position and ready to take opportunities that God places in your path. And being disciplined is one of them. He makes the point over in Timothy, 2 Timothy chapter 2, that if we cleanse ourselves from what is dishonorable, then we are vessels ready for the master, useful to the master, ready for every good work. That there's this on-deck position where we are ready to be used for those good works. And self-discipline is a key component to that. And sometimes we get off the path. Sometimes we get sidetracked. And there is a bit of correction that needs to take place. And the Hebrew writer here is writing to people who have done just that. They have become Christians and they are now getting sidetracked with all of their old habits of life. And so he spends the entire book to tell them that Jesus is way better than their old habits of life. And then they need to look here in verses 1 and verse 2 towards the founder and the perfecter of their faith. But then he goes on to verse 5. He says, have you forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as sons? My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be weary when reproved by him. For the Lord disciplines the one whom he loves, and he chastises every son whom he receives. It is for discipline that you have to endure. God is treating you as sons. For what son is there whom the father does not discipline? Or if you were left without discipline, in which all have participated, then you were illegitimate children and not sons. Besides this, we have earthly fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them. Shall we not much more be subject to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time, as seemed best to them, but he disciplines us for our good, that we may share in his holiness. For the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but it later yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. Therefore lift your drooping hands and strengthen your weak knees, and make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be put out of joint, but rather be healed. He starts off in verse 5, have you forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as sons? He considers it an exhortation to be disciplined by God. That whenever they get off the path, to be corrected by him, to be put back on the path. It is for the purpose of help, and we should not find God's discipline to be drudgery on us. We shouldn't find it wearisome when reproved by him. Those are hard things. You consider in verse 6, he chastises every son whom he receives. It's part of being a son, it's part of being a Christian, is to be corrected by God. You think of David. Nathan the prophet comes to David and he gives David the story about this one little ewe lamb and the one man who loved that one little ewe lamb. And David gets so outraged over that one little ewe lamb, and then Nathan says, "You're that man. And you're the man that stole the ewe lamb." And David could have said, "Who are you to judge me?" And all the other phrases that are popular and have always been popular, to shift blame off of yourself and onto somebody else. And yet God sent Nathan to reprove and to chastise David. And yet he didn't find it wearisome whenever he did that. The same thing goes for us, is that sometimes we are going to be on the wrong path. Sometimes we're going to lose our self-control, and we are going to need to be disciplined by God. Like I said, I don't have every specific answer for all of our lives. Does the Bible speak directly to us having a plan, or God having a plan or a use for us? Absolutely. Does the Bible talk about us being used in God's service? Absolutely. Does the Bible talk about God interacting with us individually with providence and care and protection and guidance? Absolutely. Sometimes we forget to see that. We pray for it, and sometimes out of habit or out of rote, and whenever it does come up, whenever he does provide, whenever he does guide and direct, we just push that to the back of our mind and forget that he has been so loving and interactive and tender with us through all of that. Almost all of us are not local from around here. Almost all of us have traveled here from other areas. Not all of us, but most of us. I'm guessing that most of us never really planned on being here in Williamsburg. And yet this has been a huge blessing for so many of us. Looking back over the last 20 years, can you see how God has directed you and guided you in all those areas? Putting the right people in the right place in order to get you where you need to be. Maybe have you seen where you had been the right person at the right place to help someone else get where they need to be? Looking back and seeing that in your life gives you encouragement, and it gives you a hope that that same process of God using you is going to be for you in the future. And seeing that and recognizing that and being ready for that is paramount. And so diligently ask that he guide you and direct you and lead you out of temptation, and that he would give you opportunities of open doors to preach his word, or to teach other people, or to invite other people. Put his will first, not what we want or what we expect out of life or what we demand out of life, but put his will first. I heard a really interesting quote. I think I've shared it with you guys recently. Someone had asked one of the ladies who had worked through a couple of adoptions about how does she handle it all. And she said, well, life is tough, but thankfully it's short. It's a different perspective. That's not what I want, but what God wants, and what he wants for me. Even though it may be hard right now, it's not going to be all that long. Put his will first above your will, whatever it is. Be willing to be someone who has conviction without compromise. To never give up what you know to be truth in order to suit somebody else or to appease somebody else. The world wants to start not with you believing in this or that, but you just allowing it to be there, that you accepting it as it is, that you compromise just a little bit. We'll leave that topic for another day. We need to be individuals who are willing to serve and not need to be number one in our own lives. We need to be individuals who have self-discipline without drudgery and be willing to be disciplined by God without drudgery. Those things are all, I think, critical for God using you for the very best for his purposes. In Jeremiah, it's the same passage that Paul uses the illustration from in Romans chapter 9. God describes himself in Jeremiah as being a potter who sits at the wheel and begins to mold Israel into the nation that he wants them to be. But something strange happens in Jeremiah. As God is molding the clay, it spoils in his hand. That through their rebellion and their hard-heartedness, they did not allow themselves to be molded into the clay that God designed for them. And the promise that's made over in Romans chapter 9 for us is for you to be soft, moldable clay. For you to allow God to work in your life, to work you over as clay in order to be the very best version of you that you can be, the most useful vessel in God's house that you could be. It's a beautiful analogy and a very stark reminder for us not to let ourselves be spoiled in God's hands. John has picked out a song of invitation. If we have stepped off the path, or if we are struggling with our walk, we're struggling with putting God first in all things and letting his will dominate in our lives, and you need the prayers of the saints or anything else we can help you with, let us know as we stand and sing.